One of the things to consider is really where is the next frontier for OTT. And we believe that really there's four things to consider in terms of where OTT will be going. There's the accessibility to content, there's portability, there's upgradeability, and then there's the UI and the UX interface. Let's look at it from the standpoint of how we were consuming content in the past. In past decades, a lot of entertainment consumption was based on purchasing that content, whether it was on vinyl records or CDs or DVDs or Blu-ray. Essentially, we had millions of copies of different entertainment content sitting on shelves in different homes around the world. That is, let's say, from the 80s perspective, kind of moves into the 90s. But also in the 90s, we found a way to be able to bring that content onto our computers so that we could have a digital copy of our music and so on. But again, we were in a scenario where we had duplicates of that content sitting on multiple computers, millions of different computers. In the last decade, we evolved to the point where we can actually move that content into the cloud. That was really kind of the third stage of consuming content. So rather than having it in a local environment, which may be a scenario where our hard drive crashes and so on, and we lose all of our entertainment content that we've purchased, we put it in the cloud and work off the assumption that the cloud is much more secure and protecting what we've purchased. But even in that scenario, and that kind of brings us to present day, that content sitting in the cloud is still duplicated millions of times for every single user. So if we kind of extrapolate that model and moving into the future, it's probably fair to say that we can move into a scenario where that cloud, which is storing our content, and now that it's in the cloud, we really can get away with a single instance of that content. If we look at, let's say, the Apple iTunes Match capability, where the iTunes software can look at the music that's on your computer and bring it into the iCloud service, you actually don't really have to upload that music into iCloud at all. It just identifies which songs you have and gives you a license to use that content that's in the cloud. But essentially, we're looking at a scenario where that instance of that song exists once, and millions of users have a license that allows them access to that single piece of content. So we can take that type of model that Apple has adopted and look at it from the standpoint of video as well. We're going to delete all of the instances that you have of your content, but we're going to give you a better version of it that's going to sit in the cloud. And you can then, with your license, access that video, music, or whatever, and play it back on any device that you have. Of course, we will need to have a good internet connection, an always-on connection, in order to be able to always access that cloud content. So there's some requirements around an always-on connectivity in order to enjoy that content. But essentially, we're saving on millions of terabytes of storage by deleting all of these instances and having just a single instance of that entertainment content enjoyable by everybody that's purchased it. And this is where we're having a single instance of, let's say, a 4K movie. That movie has all the different audio tracks and subtitle tracks and different versions for extended version, director's cuts, and so on in the cloud. That user would potentially transcode on the fly that 4K version to the version that sits in their hand or in their living room. And really, this is where we see kind of the next level of accessibility of that content, this multi-screen world where we're not really having the ability to transcode on the fly a 4K movie today. But once we get to that technology and we have the bandwidth capabilities and we have the local processing capabilities and the cloud processing capabilities, we can get to the stage where we have that single instance of content and everybody just has a license that points to it. Another thing that we need to consider is really the upgradeability of content as well, something that we really haven't been able to enjoy from an entertainment industry perspective. So when we were buying the VHS versions of movies, then we need to repurchase when we wanted a DVD version, and again repurchase when we wanted a Blu-ray. So it's a little bit of frustration from a consumer perspective. But OTT kind of gives us this opportunity to have this upgradable path, similar to the upgradable paths that we have in software, but now from a movie perspective. So if somebody had a standard definition version of a movie and they buy an HD television, then there is the possibility to basically upgrade that content to HD. When they upgrade their television to 4K, then they can again upgrade to streaming the 4K content. When they add a new subscriber in the family that's going to be using that content, then again there's upgradable capabilities, or when the movie has some extended versions. So this upgradability is something that's quite compelling and that can be utilized once we have everything sitting in the cloud. Another thing to consider is the portability, and something, these issues are really actually already being addressed. And when we talk about portability, it's about being able to watch the content on a mobile, on a tablet, on a PC, on television. But there's a lot of improvements that can be made in terms of portability. Imagine going to the theater and watching a movie, but getting a voucher, a discount voucher, to be able to download that same movie onto your television or your local device when that content becomes available in the future. Portability from the standpoint that if I'm buying that content on iOS, Apple, then I can play it on a Windows machine and I can play it on an Android device, and there's no really restrictions from the physical device that I'm using or the operating system that I'm using. That level of portability is something that we think that consumers can really enjoy and is possible once we have an OTT service. One of the aspects where this portability applies in today's technology is UltraViolet, where when you're buying a physical version of a Blu-ray in a movie, then you have a code, a digital locker that allows you to access that content on different devices and even extend it to family members. This is really in the right direction of how consumers really want to be able to consume their content into the future. And UltraViolet is a good example of moving in the right direction. The final thing that is worth mentioning, and we talked about it earlier, is the user interface and the user experience. The basis of this is in the personalization of the user experience and the engagement that the OTT platform is creating for that individual, and have that subscriber feel like there's a one-to-one relationship with that provider in the type of content that they want to watch, that they like, that they want to watch into the future, and the recommendations that are provided, and a complete integration of the social networking aspect, so that all of your friends that are interacting with the same content, you can see what they're doing as well, as one of the main drivers of discovering new types of content. So this aspect of content is king is still paramount in the entertainment community, but in areas where content is quite prevalent in the developed markets, then the differentiator is no longer the content being king, it's the actual kingdom that you're creating around it, and the playground that you're creating in order for the engagement of the consumer to be maximized. In areas of the emerging markets, the content is not quite prevalent. The content rights is still being sorted out by the main providers of entertainment content. So what is paramount in these emerging markets is the content itself. In the anticipation of the user experience being paramount in these regions, some of these providers are really looking at content, acquiring that content in parallel to building a very compelling user experience.